Is this on? Can you hear me? It's not that big of a room. No. Okay. Hi, everyone. I just want to welcome you to the event. My name's Jeremy McLaughlin. I'm an attorney at the law firm here at K&L Gates. For those of you that have been to events before, welcome back. For the newbies, K&L Gates is one of the largest law firms in the world. We have 2,000 attorneys and about 50 offices around the world. And we also have a very large blockchain practice. It spans kind of every industry. I'm a payments fintech attorney, so I counsel a lot of crypto companies. We have people working in blockchain in the energy industry, in securities, real estate, supply chain management. It kind of runs the gamut. We are actually one of the first major law firms to institute our own private internal blockchain so that lawyers can actually learn what this all meant as we advise our clients. And so that's how we hooked up with Karen and Blockchain by Women. And so we're happy to support the event. For the additional reason of diversity, we are huge supporters of diversity, and recognizing and supporting women in the industry is something we want to do. So I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you all for coming, and just want to give you a little background on why we started. So our co-founders, Marina's here, got tired of hearing from people, do you know of any women in blockchain? And we would say, yes, they're here. Just reach out to them. But seriously, yes, we wanted to bring more women into the blockchain industry, network, understand how relationships can develop and new companies can develop. And so very happy to have this panel tonight. We've had a number of topics throughout the year, including blockchain and in crypto in 2019, energy use cases, and this panel here will talk about blockchain in general use cases, and we'll continue and have a number of other sessions that Marina will talk about later. So, wanted to introduce Radhika, our moderator here before she introduces the panel. And Radhika is founding member of StarChain Ventures, which is focused on foundational blockchain technology and enterprise blockchain solutions. She's also a TEDx speaker and has been an expert in blockchain and healthcare, and also managing partner of Double Over Group, a Silicon Valley-based blockchain advisory. So I want to just hand it over to Radhika and our amazing panel here. Oh, yes.
About microphones, thank you.
The microphone's
We
not
couldn't
working.
hear you while you were introducing, but now it's fine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so if you, so hold it close. I can't hear you.
Everybody hear me now?
Sure.
Okay. Great pleasure to be here with you, and I speak a lot on blockchain, done like 45 different panel appearances last year, I think 15 keynotes or so, or 10 keynotes I think last year. So speak a lot on this topic, and particularly on the enterprise side of things and on adoption and use cases. So crypto is wonderful, but we're still waiting for some significant use cases. There are a few these days, thankfully, but it's slow days, right? And so in the meantime, there's a lot happening over in enterprise, and that's typically what I speak about and write about. And to that point, also co-authoring a book that will be published in May. So for those of you that are interested in enterprise blockchain and real use cases, you might be wanting to stay tuned to that. Today we're going to talk about what's working and what's not, and we're going to try to keep the discussion a little bit broad, but I think also focused on real-world use cases as well, and really want to hear about all the exciting things that all of you are involved with. And I will make a disclaimer, I think it's far better for them to introduce themselves than for me to introduce them. So without further ado, here's Olga.
You want to hold this?
Sure.
Maybe we'll share.
Okay.
Do you want to share with me?
Yeah, that works.
I love sharing.
Decentralized,
I love sharing. This is how we're going to become friends. We've never met before. We never shared a panel, so now we're going to be best friends through sharing.
Yeah.
If only we figure out how to push buttons. Right? We got that. Okay. So I see Radhika every time, only when we speak. We're really good friends. And we only get an opportunity to catch up on panels. My name is Olga Mack. I am VP of Strategy at Quantstamp. Quantstamp secures blockchain applications such as smart contracts. We're building protocol, we're building tools, and we provide a number of audits to crypto-native companies, to exchanges, and to many enterprises. So we've seen quite a few projects and quite a variety of projects. I'm happy to talk about it. Full disclosure, I'm a lawyer. I was going to say a former lawyer, but I am of a belief that once a lawyer, always a lawyer. So I'm not practicing at Quantstamp, and I'm not on the legal side, I'm on the business side, but I'm still a lawyer. And in the past, I was a general counsel of a startup. I was in numerous other roles at other startups. At some point, I was at Visa, and at some point, I was at Wilson Sonsini. So before my crypto adventure, I've had a very viable legal career, which sometimes I miss because people ask me whether I'm a recovering lawyer. This is what people ask me, and I actually was a very happy lawyer. Let me put it this way: you tell people what to do for a living. If you don't enjoy that, then life is different for you. But I really love being a general counsel. I also enjoy my current adventure.
Thank you for that. My name is Saritta Hines, and I'm the founder and CEO of Trustabit. And our goal is to mobilize the traveling consumer. So from a consumer perspective, if you've ever had a delayed flight, you didn't know about it until you was at the airport, or if you were due compensation, the airline didn't let you know, then that's what we're trying to help. So we sell enterprise software to airlines to help them automatically notify you of flight delays, give you compensation options. So now we're giving you the power of choice to decide if you want miles, vouchers, or dollars. And then we're also turning boarding passes into, we're making paper boarding passes and turning them into digital. So now if you get a $50 voucher and you go, let's say, to McDonald's in the terminal and you only spend 10, you don't get the rest of it back. So we're just creating a solution where not only is it digital, but you also get that money back. I met Karen actually at a women's startup lab accelerator. She's one of my mentors, and that was a year ago. So we've stayed in contact since then. My background is technical, so I spent the last 13 years as a platform architect. So I don't code. I can set up the environment for the coders to talk to, and I can help translate what they're saying to the business. So I'm just happy to be a part of this group and just being able to, like Karen said, like I always get like, are there more women doing this? I'm like, there's a ton. Like how hard are you looking? Like all you need to do is just do a search, women in blockchain, or go on Facebook or any of these, or Meetup. You'll see a lot of groups for that. So I'm just very excited to be here. Actually, it worked out perfect because I'm in an aviation accelerator in Ireland, which is quite interesting because we're based in Orange County, so our first investors was an Irish company. So it's like, and it's specifically aviation. So that's been helping pretty much get us on this hockey stick growth as far as like traction and talking to the airlines. Because our sales process is probably 12 to 18 months. And if you don't know anybody in that industry, it's going to be so hard to get in. So it really helps that I'm in this accelerator and getting that exposure. So thank you.
Yeah, great.
I'm Allison Berke. I run the cyber initiative at Stanford, which is a policy-focused cybersecurity research group, and that spun out the Center for Blockchain Research, which is another center. When I say it's a center, it's like 6 faculty members who kind of all work together. It's not, we don't have a building. But we have some funding because there were some ICOs that realized they wanted to contribute to university research to make themselves look more philanthropic and also more legitimate. We were like, yes, we'll take your extra $10 million. So that was fantastic for Stanford and for us. We're a research-focused center, so a lot of what I'll tell you about is more kind of crypto-focused and probably, at least 6 months out from being deployed, but we have several people in CS cryptographers who kind of work together on these projects along with their students, and we also run what is now called the Stanford Blockchain Conference. It used to be called the Blockchain Protocol Analysis and Security Engineering Conference, which I think tells you a lot more what it's about, but people love the Stanford name. They're like, where am I going? Stanford, what am I going to learn about blockchain? What is it? A conference? Let's call it the Stanford Blockchain. And so that's been going on for 3 years, and it's a research-focused conference also, but I've met Karen there, and a lot of people from industry also come to hear about what students are working on and what research projects are available.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexa Beaver. I'm part of a digital innovation team that's based here in San Francisco within BASF. So if you don't know what BASF is, we're a giant chemical company. So we have like 110,000 employees globally and 5 people here in San Francisco. So we're a small and mighty force. So basically the purpose of our team is we help connect the businesses to opportunities with startup companies so that they can explore emerging tech and kind of how those technologies will impact the industries in which we work. So agriculture, construction, human nutrition, basically any material or thing you can think of, we're tied to that supply chain in some way. Before joining BASF, I actually came from a blockchain startup myself. It was kind of an accident how I ended up there. So I'm a chemical engineer and I joined the company specifically to help with some carbon impact assessment work. So they basically started out in the industry of helping Sherpa people through the process of creating and brokering carbon credits. And so I joined on for a very specific project, but at the same time they said, well, we're actually starting a new venture, a blockchain company looking into carbon tracking and kind of more broadly speaking, how to differentiate commodities in a commodity market context based on their impact. So my first kind of foray into blockchain was this really crazy outside the box use case and got me really excited, particularly around impact use cases. So within the team now, I actually founded last year our internal blockchain experimentation lab. And I think we'll touch on some interesting things around use cases and kind of what was working and what wasn't working and what kind of led us to form the lab because of that. So thanks for having me.
Amazing. I think this is like deserves an applause just for that alone. What I'm really excited is, first of all, it's women in blockchain or blockchain by women, but I'll tell you something, it's really fundamentally about the technology and the use cases of technology, and we just happen to have great women talking about this topic. So I think the focus is really on the technology itself, on the use cases. So I just wanted to open out really broadly, right? I mean, I'm gonna guess that most of you know what blockchain is and are somewhat familiar with blockchain.
Can I ask how many people?
Yeah, how many people are familiar with blockchain?
Work in the industry.
Or work in the industry. Okay, some of you do, or maybe half of you do and half of you don't. So, very, very simply, you've got a distributed ledger technology. It just means that, the data is not all in one place. It's distributed and it's actually decentralized. But you also have, this ultra high security that is attached to it, to blockchain. There's many different approaches. I'll just say that there's a public side of blockchain, which most people have heard about. If you've heard about any of the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., that's the public side of blockchain. It's a foundational technology, essentially, and it all has blockchain as foundational technology, but it's a different application of it. So you'll have, on the enterprise side, a different kind of blockchain called permission blockchain. But they all share certain attributes, which is that it's ultra secure, it's immutable, meaning that once you write to it, you can't unwrite. I won't get into other ramifications from there because there are other ways that you can change data, et cetera, by forking things, but won't get too technical on that. Suffice it to say that when you add up this distributed ledger technology and you're really not storing the actual data, you're storing a record of the transaction on the blockchain, so that's called a hash. And all of these hashes are connected from one block to another, and hence the word blockchain, because it's a chain of blocks. And so suffice it to say that you've got this ultra secure, immutable side of blockchain, you've got this decentralized structure, you've got a consensus protocol, which means that it determines what happens when you need to vote on something, what do you do with a bad actor or a bad result or a false record or whatever. You have to decide on something, you have to have a consensus among all of the nodes on the network, because it's not any one entity that's going to make that decision about what's there or what's not, etc. So you've got different types of consensus protocols that kind of protect this kind of information in this way, and it also serves as a governance model. And the last thing is that it's open source, and so you have this if those of you that are familiar with open source architectures from back in the day, that's still very much a viable thing and very central to the blockchain. Also, you've got tokenization, which many of the crypto projects have built in. Think about it from the currency side, you might be using it as an actual token that has some value to it, but you also can have tokenization as an incentivization mechanism within a network. So that's your quick 2-minute primer on blockchain. We'll get into more of it. But I guess I'll check with the group here, because what I really want to talk about is what are some of the challenges that we're solving using blockchain? Who wants to start first? Olga. I'll pick you. You're nearest to me.
Oh, okay. I feel like a flower. I've been picked.
A beautiful flower.
Wow, we're gonna be good friends. I'm gonna take you home. You give me compliments. Look, I mean, there's lots of problems to solve, I guess I have a little bit of a hard time picking the one that I like the most. I'll share one problem that I'm very closely working on, and that is a problem. We work with the World Economic Forum to solve corruption in Colombia. It's a familiar problem for somebody like myself who grew up in the former Soviet Union. I immigrated when I was 13, so I had a little bit of a glimpse of what corruption feels like. So just a little bit of a background. The specific corruption instance that we're helping to solve is and trying to address is in schools. It turns out in many developing countries, kids go to school not to get an education, but to get a meal. They're so poor, and the government provides meals, and so parents send the kids to school not to get educated, but to be fed. And a lot of that function is outsourced to various vendors who, through various presumably competitive bidding, get a contract and supposed to provide to kids, a complex carb, a protein, and a vegetable. I know, this is riveting. What ends up happening on paper is it looks perfect, but in reality, because now some of the some locations have this amazing device, we know that that some kids, instead of protein and the complex carb, get high syrup or high very sweet things, and in some cases they don't get vegetables, and in some cases they just get a pile of rocks. So they're not getting nutrition they need. And so Colombia wants to solve this problem, and the World Economic Forum is leading this project, designing a pilot to solve it in one of the school districts. And when it is successful, it will be scaled in Colombia and then in other regions in Latin America and outside. What I've learned about, when we're supporting this project, we're not leading this project, we're providing some expertise, we're helping with design, because of my legal background, I'm a little involved in on the policy side as well. What I've learned about is that when you solve a complex problem like corruption, or frankly, really any problem, the technology part of it is this small, right? We were a part of the design workshop. We were using design thinking, and in the room we had policymakers, we had academics, we had law enforcement, we had parents, we had students, and when we all looked at where this process breaks down, everybody knows where it breaks down, and what the challenges are, and what solution looks like. It's a process. And a big part of it, some of it is actually taking pictures of meals and storing it on blockchain to make sure we have transparency. But a big chunk of it is to make sure that parents actually take pictures, and that the administration actually is not enforced to raise this question, and that the law enforcement goes after them, right? So in designing a quote-unquote blockchain solution, you have to understand that blockchain is a small piece. It's a back-end technology. It is not visible, it's sort of under the hood. And if you are designing a blockchain solution, technology is a small piece. If you solve any complex problem, any social, any business problem, it's going to be a small piece, and there are going to have to be other pieces that fall in place. And so being part of helping to design a full solution is very illuminating and very exciting, and actually very humbling. And so when we talk about blockchain as as the only solution, it's actually laughable, because blockchain is usually part of a whole lot of things, of data, policy, AI, and other, like full stack of technology, plus policy, plus behaviors, plus other things.
Great. Saritta, talk to us about the aviation industry and travel industry.
Wow, you'd be surprised how old the software is. When I saw it, I'm like, it's amazing, we're still kept up there. But I've seen a lot, it's really starting to happen recently, like the more companies that are starting to bite into aviation. That was actually the reason why I chose travel and aviation, because I felt everything else was pretty much overcrowded, and it looked like aviation was ripe for disruption. So I really like baggage tracking, being able to like take a picture of your barcode and know exactly where your bag is at, and it's coupled with IoT devices. And that's one of the besides ours, that's one of the better use cases that I like. I like it for loyalty. And also, I like it for the interoperability. So in our case, being able to use a voucher that you got from one airline to be able to use it with the hotel, cruise line, tour operator, because they're all on the same blockchain, so they'll all be able to validate those transactions. Digital identity is another one that I've been seeing quite a lot. I'm not really a fan of that too much. I'm not really a fan of any blockchain solution that requires an outside intervention. So if it requires like a human to do a task, then in my opinion that's the weakest link, because what if you can go and corrupt this person, and in a sense the data that they're putting into the blockchain is pretty much corrupted. I feel like a supply blockchain is one of those things that does that. I think Walmart, what they're doing is, the visibility is great, but I still have my doubts about that system, because now you have each farmer that comes in and say, yeah, you know, this came from patch 7 or patch 8. How do I really know that? So now I have to trust the farmer. I need to trust the packaging system, and all of this is pretty much off-chain. So that's some of the things that
we can rectify some of that.
I know there's some supporters of it, but I have my doubts, and it's just more so from, I think the idea is great, especially like for medicine that needs to be kept at a certain temperature, or fish that needs to be kept at a certain degree.
Hence, the key is IoT.
Yeah.
You've got to have sensor technology.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we work
It's not,
actually.
it's not so much of the trust factor.
Yeah, we work on some of this sort of farming, broadly speaking, some of the chemicals, but they still fall in farming. And yes, smart devices that don't, you're right, so at this point, many farmers report where chemicals are spread, where strawberries are picked, how long they've been in the sun. I clearly have never been a farmer, so I'm talking about some things that I've never done before. But there's a lot of sort of like keeping a notepad and writing some things down and then putting them on a table, right? But increasingly, there are containers that keep track of GPS location and how much has been spread and how long it was in the sun. And you know, those are all the things that could be calculated. So increasingly, we don't rely on humans to self-report, but those are automatically connected and put on blockchain. But you're right not to trust humans. I have trust issues when it comes to humans.
If there's a time to watch a video, it's called Vine to Table, and it showcases SAP's platform on supply chain and food specifically. It's a great video to watch. It's called Vine to Table if you're interested, and they have something on Ocean to Table as well. But this is a huge use case in food safety, and not just safety, but authentication of source, tracking the origins. Over to you, Allison.
Yeah, I guess on a broad level, the problems that we're solving are removing centralized sources of trust, because when you have an industry that has kind of a hub and spoke architecture, that hub becomes the bottleneck, because all the spokes have to send transactions into that hub, have to verify information to get to that hub, and can't transact among themselves. And like Saritta was saying, it works a lot better when you're talking about a digital assets, when you're talking about money, or when you're talking about file storage, like with FileCoins does, where if you're just dealing with something digital and not something physical. To a certain extent, if you're looking at data like medical prescription data, where what you're really sending around is the digital asset and not the physical drug, those kinds of applications tend to work better for blockchain systems, because you don't have to verify in the back end that like this piece of data actually refers to a physical fish, and that it refers to one particular physical fish and not another fish that has been literally baited and switched out for another fish.
I'll just slide this in.
Yeah, and these, I guess, blockchain systems tend to also work best when that kind of hub intermediary is kind of on a higher hierarchical level than the spokes. So if you think about like banks with their customers and having banks talk to one another, where they don't have as much of an incentive to make that process easier for the customers because they're at a separate level of the hierarchy. Removing that kind of centralized source of trust then not only makes it easier for the different spokes to transact with one another and to talk to one another, but it can also remove a lot of the cost and a lot of kind of the rent seeking of that higher order, that like second hierarchy.
Yeah, so I have my favorite problems within my current role and then my favorite problems in general. So I think kind of in general, what really excites me is in removing the middleman in many cases. We're also seeing some of these incentive structures arise that we've mentioned a bit. So one example I really love is a web browser called Brave. I don't know how many of you have heard of Brave, but it's a really cool, basically it's a web browser, so you can download it and basically use it like you would Google Chrome. And what they have is they have some functionality for you to actually block ads. And so they provide this functionality that you can actually turn on the ability to see ads, and then you're rewarded directly for that. So in a normal scenario, the kind of advertising companies or the websites that are pushing these ads to you are getting revenues from pushing the ads. And in this case, basically, they're completely cutting out that middleman and allowing you to be rewarded for seeing the ads. And then you can use the Brave tokens, the basic attention tokens, to donate to content creators and websites that you really like and that you want to promote. So that's just a really cool example, I think, of kind of disintermediating a central party and then layering on this incentive mechanism that we haven't had in the past. Internally, I think it's really interesting because there's seemingly simple problems that we're solving with blockchain today. So one really cool example is, it's amazing to me, but there is an issue that ships just don't show up with things, and it happens pretty frequently. So entire ships of goods will just not show up, and it leads to logistics nightmares and products being lost. And so basically there's a startup that we're working with called 300 Qubits. And what they've done is they've really developed a pretty simple solution where they use a smart contract, which we haven't dug into very much, but it's basically just programmed logic on the blockchain, kind of if-then statements on the blockchain. And the way this works is that the shipper and the customer will put in a deposit to say, we're committing to delivering you these goods. And if they don't show up, then the shipper loses their deposit. So it's very simple, but a solution for this did not exist yet. And it's exciting because we've made a little money off of it from some no-show ships, which is pretty interesting.
There's some great enterprise use cases similarly on that shipping. IBM Trade Lens and its deployment with Maersk, which basically owns 20% of the shipping industry. It's a huge problem. It's not just ships of goods, especially high-value goods. So we've got cases of piracy, people that are in collusion with pirates, and saying, oh, by the way, there's a really attractive box of high-end electronic goods. You might be interested in this, and the pirate ship shows up and then, oops, the container fell off the ship, and you didn't know anything about it. So, Alibaba was experiencing a lot of problems with this, for example. So, just to encapsulate, we've heard of a gamut of different use cases, anything from food to supply chain to logistics to the travel industry. There's a lot of different activity going on, and I would say in generally in terms of use cases, we're seeing a great deal of concentration in supply chain logistics, in healthcare, and also in financial services. So these are the three major areas. There is also the power sector. We've got a huge amount of activity going on in the power sector. So there's some pretty good use cases already being deployed, which are not in the experimental stage, by the way, and a lot of it is happening on the enterprise side. So I guess I'll go to the next question. Bear with me a moment. Let's talk a little bit about public versus permission. The public blockchain being, what most people have heard about, permissionless, trustless blockchain. A lot of the crypto side is on that public side, but then there's also the permission side in enterprise. I mean, what kind of applications are you seeing on either side? This is an open-ended question. So either side that you're seeing on public or permission, and what are some of those use cases that you're seeing? And some of it we've already addressed, but maybe you could provide more color. Should we start with you?
Yeah, definitely. So ironically, a lot of the work that we're doing is not on permission blockchain. So that last example I gave around 300 qubits, that could easily be sort of a permission blockchain if you just have some specific entities that are transacting in this way. But in this case, the tokens that are used in this context actually need to be bought with Ether. So from my perspective, permission blockchains are really good for use cases where you have the parties pretty well defined and that you don't need interoperability with sort of the public blockchain realm. And in many cases, that's difficult because some of these applications that are being built require you to basically swap out the native token for that application with a Bitcoin or Ethereum or something like that. So what you gain from having sort of a more controlled network and speeding up transactions in a permissioned blockchain scenario, you kind of lose some of that interoperability. And so there's also some implications there around if you want to layer on payment functionality, for example, that seems to be a bit harder to do in permission blockchain scenarios as well. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'll pass it to someone else, but.
Yeah, because a lot of the research projects that we work with also are dealing with public blockchain and not permission blockchain. The one thing I'll say about permission blockchain is that ISO, the International Organization of Standards, is developing standards for permission blockchain systems, and they haven't released them yet. I feel like that would be a great thing to wait for, is that we don't end up with a lot of different kind of independently federated permission blockchain solutions that then can't talk to one another. Like if ISO is going to allow us to have standards that allow them to talk to one another, that would be great. A lot of the projects that we do for public blockchains are working on enhancing privacy of transactions and making the actual chain or making the transactions themselves smaller so that more people can run nodes and so that it costs less in terms of space to run a node. So that can be things like different signature mechanisms like Schnorr signatures, that if you want to have a transaction that involves 5 parties kind of transacting amongst themselves and they all have to sign different parts of this transaction rather than having to send 5 separate transactions, you can actually mush those signatures together into one and just send one transaction, so that helps keep the size of that transaction smaller and then ultimately keeps the size of the chain smaller and lets more people run nodes and lets more people validate transactions. We also work with
what was that called? What signature?
Schnorr signatures. It's named after the cryptographer who developed it, but he also has a funny name. And then we also do different kind of zero-knowledge proof structures. There are Starks and ZK snarks, and then bulletproofs, which have the best name of all 3 of those, which are just another form of zero-knowledge proofs, so you can transact more privately on a public chain. And that kind of goes counter to some of the other work that we do, which involves de-identification of public transactions or re-identification of transactions on public blockchains and being able to trace either where stolen tokens are moving or being able to identify which hubs belong to which exchanges or who is connected to whom in this graph. Sarah Michael-John at UCL does a lot of that work, and then we have a grad student at Stanford who's also working on some of that in terms of being able to trace corrupt payments or being able to analyze an entire blockchain and say how much of this activity is legitimate financial activity, how much is investing, how much is person-to-person payments, that kind of thing. One of the reasons why we want to do this is because for the regulatory side of things, currently, there's no really good way to claw back coins that we know are stolen property or that we know have been stolen from exchanges and we can see where they went. There's no really good way of restituting that property to the people from whom they were stolen. And that's something that legally we kind of need to have a mechanism to do because we have laws about receiving and fencing stolen property, and so right now tokens are kind of in this gray area where we know where they've gone, but because we don't have color coins, we don't have a way of tracing them, we don't really have a way of taking them back. So some of what we're doing in terms of analyzing public blockchains is leading toward how can we develop better policy for finding an equitable way to return stolen tokens to the owner when we can see where they've gone on the chain.
I find that when you talk about sort of private, public, that's sort of design choice question, just as you alluded. It's a little bit asking, is fork better than a spoon? And the answer to that is depends what you're eating, right? They're not inherently better. It's just it's uncomfortable to use fork for soup, for example. And so we started as a Ethereum native company because we work with many enterprise clients and we find ourselves working a lot on Hyperledger. And by the way, Daniela from Hyperledger Foundation, I want to give her a shout out if you have questions about it. She is the best person in the room to answer those questions. Sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you've been very useful to me, so thank you for that. So they're not necessarily better, they're just different. So we have been blockchain agnostic for quite a while now. We're also now seeing a different trend. We now see clients that are they're neither on Ethereum or blockchain, they're on other things. And we find that the flexibility and the learning we've gained on all of those platforms is very useful. And so again, it's now we have chopsticks, not just a fork, not just a spoon. And so having that open mind, I think is very important. I want to touch base on ISO because I do think that a lot of what the virtue of this technology is kind of creating transparency or putting people at the table that are not always at the table. So having what lawyers would describe as rules of the game, or otherwise known as laws, is very important, or standards. ISO, and one of the things that I'm doing is working on a number of standards. I educate policymakers. I, for example, educated Department of Commerce. I met with Department of Business Oversight. I met with every legislator in California last session when we were passing and defining blockchain. Explaining them what it is, because I'm a firm believer that the most dangerous weapon we have are uneducated legislators. And so ISO, for example, I'm a huge fan of ISO because in my prior lives I was an IP litigator and patents. There's a lot of pools and ISO has a number of standards. So I was very drawn to it because I know a lot about it. Right on their website, they say they take 35 years to get to a standard. 35 years! Yes, mind-blowing. I'm still recovering. This is, ISO is a well-established international organization that has many, many standards. This little device has a lot of standards in it. That's why it works so beautifully. If you ever had a wallet or had to buy coins, and you were like, wow, this is not a process I want to be part of because this is not working, it's because it doesn't have many standards like this device does that works everything perfectly.
From a technical standpoint, private and permission blockchains. When I think of public blockchains, I automatically think of CryptoKitties. And what happened with that? I mean, it pretty much slowed the whole network down. So if you built a dApp on top of Ethereum at the time, it didn't work. It took you, instead of, I think they were doing like maybe 5 minutes per transaction, that increased to like maybe 15 minutes. And also I'm not really, my background is in corporate, so I became a blockchain person. I only knew blockchain for like 2 months, so now I'm the blockchain person, but I get it. So it was hard for me to convince them about miners. It was hard for me to convince them that someone can fork this chain without their input, and now they would have to automatically update their solution. So that kind of pushed me away totally from public blockchains, and it's just pushed me more towards actually Hyperledger. Our solution is built on top of Hyperledger Fabric. Like you said, I try to describe permission blockchain as pretty much none of the hype, but all of the tech. And they're also
Love that. I'll have to leverage that.
There's no cryptocurrency within our solution. So all we're doing is just pretty much validating transactions. And I like that approach even more. It does have its downsides, like the chain probably won't be that big and you can easily attack it. But at the end of the day, once quantum computers come along, you can come on and attack every blockchain. But one thing I do like about public blockchains that you mentioned was ZK Snarks and that's zero knowledge proofs. And when I found out about that, it was like my mind was just blown. So it was like, whoa. So prove to me that you know my password without me telling you. So just imagine I'm at the end of the cave and there are 2 ways to get through, maybe 3 ways to get through. I know that if you take a certain route and you get to me, okay, you solved it, but you still didn't, I didn't give you the route, I didn't give you my password, you figured it out. So you performed the action and then you got to me. So I'm hoping that Hyperledger, if you can hear this, Danielle, I'm hoping that they include some type of protocol like that. Another thing that I'm not really a fan of is the transaction costs. So, and the gas that you have to pay with that. So I've seen some solutions that were developed on the on public Ethereum blockchain, and the amount of money that it costs just to put those transactions through was also like a barrier for a lot of Fortune 500 companies. So I'm more partial to, I guess it depends on who you're building the solution for.
I think that's actually the biggest takeaway is that you've got pros and cons in any of these systems, if you will. And you really have to start from the end result. What does success look like? What is it that you're trying to solve and why? And once you have that figured out, you can then figure out which route will be the best in terms of deploying a solution that actually works with what you're trying to solve. And I know it sounds kind of simplistic, but it really truly is reverse engineering that process by looking at the end result and what you want to accomplish and starting backwards from that and saying, what do I need to do to get there? Each system is going to have pluses and minuses, and I think some of this kind of segues to another question, which is some of the challenges that we're seeing on the public side as well as on the permission side. Nothing is like a silver bullet, right? There are things to navigate, it's a process. Each system has its pluses and minuses. On the public side, you've got still a lot of maturing of technology that needs to happen. It is a lot of promise and potential, and I think everybody sees that vision, but it's going to take us a little bit more time to get there before we start having major adoption. I think what's really interesting in the meantime is that we have some really interesting hybrid structures that are coming about, where public and permission are coming together. So case in point, you've got IBM and Stellar, for example, with their marvelous partnership around payments. And with IBM releasing WorldWire just a couple of days ago and commercial scale deployment in 72 countries across 49 different currencies, that's a pretty staggering kind of commercial application that we're still waiting to see on the purely public side. So on the permission side, I do agree with you that there are always some limitations. Consortia, you can talk about building that network of people and trusted stakeholders and how they're going to interoperate and how they're going to share and how they're going to govern themselves as a network. That's easier said than done, right? And so there's questions of IP ownership's rights that have been coming up repeatedly in conversation, and the way IBM deployed it, some have said yay or nay about it. Oracle does it differently. They don't believe in IP ownership rights, so they're really trying to decentralize that IP ownership. So everybody's coming up with a different way and a different way to go about it. So there is no silver bullet. There is no perfect solution. You really have to start at what you're trying to solve and then try to figure out the best way to deploy something. So to that point, I really do want to talk about what are some of the factors that you see driving adoption, both driving adoption on the public side and the permission side, and then what are some of the factors that you see accelerating adoption?
That's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked that. I think what it's gonna take to drive, public or private, what's gonna help drive that adoption is the big players getting into it. So if tomorrow Alibaba says, you know what, we're starting to accept payments from these cryptocurrencies, or maybe if Walmart started to accept that payment, then that'll give us that trust, like, okay, well, it's not all used for dark web all the time. We can start to trust this. And I mean, that's the same with the internet. I started using, I'm not going to tell my age, so don't add it up. When I was in high school, this was, I graduated in 97, and
you're a baby. You just made it so easy.
But we had this one computer that sat in the classroom.
She, of course, was a genius. She graduated from high school and she was, what, 5?
And, you know, there were only like maybe 2 people who really understood what that box was in the corner. And it wasn't until like these social networks start coming out. Black Planet was the first one for me. And all of my friends started to know like, well, okay, what's this internet thing? And how do I get on Black Planet? And how do I watch cat videos? That's all you really need to know. So with blockchain, I think once they find a way to get rid of that long alphanumeric address and pretty much stop talking about like nonces and hashes, then we'll be able to, it'll be more easily adoptable to us. Like it needs to just be, we don't care that all these HTTP protocols are happening in the background or any of that. I just know if I go on DuckDuckGo and type cat videos, I'll see my cat videos. That's all I care about.
I'm glad you brought up the subject of heavyweights or industry majors getting in to legitimize a space. And I think, you know, your analogy to the internet is really apropos. You know, a lot of you may not remember how the internet really kind of took off. And it was really because a lot of the majors got in. Cisco became one of the biggest proponents of the internet, had the biggest online commerce platform, and suddenly it's like, oh, it's not all that scammy stuff with pornographers and gamblers. Oh, are we talking blockchain or are we talking internet? You know, it's really very much the same thing because it's the wild, wild west sort of early days in any new emerging technology. And they are the biggest adopters of technology, the first in line to adopt and see how they can leverage it for their own benefit. But, you know, in terms of how the trajectory of adoption is happening, we're already seeing that in enterprise. So if you've got the IBMs and the Walmarts and the Carrefours and the, any major bank that is getting involved, and the JP Morgan coming out with their coin, even Facebook trying to look at tokenization models. I mean, you really have got a lot of majors now looking at saying, uh-oh, there's this thing, we better look at this, we better figure out how to use it, how to leverage it, how to, make this better for what we're already trying to do. Otherwise, we're calling it an existential threat. And that's the wave of innovation is really about, oh my God, if I don't participate in this, I might be completely out of the picture. And so I think what we're seeing in that point in adoption is really a lot of the majors are getting in and trying to figure out how they're going to participate in this new blockchain way of doing things. Over to you, Allison or Olga.
Sure. Well, thank God Jamie entered. That will help us all. So a couple of things. I think the initial entry, what draws people is gain of efficiency. It's sort of a candy. If you can do that logistics that was described better, if you can track your luggage quicker, those even small times, minutes, and small amounts in the grand schema of interstate commerce or global commerce add up to a lot of money. And I think that's why you see Walmart. I mean, we know Walmart is around because it is able to squeeze every penny from every possible thing that they've been doing. They've been doing it. They've been doing it well before blockchain. And so I think one of the reasons they're eager about it is because of the efficiencies. And so I think it's a big draw for initial crowd. What I think is also really exciting and will become an acquired taste is that the technology allows solving problems that we historically have labeled unsolvable. Mm-hmm. And we're yet to get there. We're still at efficiency point. At some point, we'll start solving very important problems that have been deemed unsolvable. And I'm really excited about that. What I think, and I remember internet when basically it was just email and porn, and not much else going on. And depending on your interest, that may or may not be an exciting place to be. But over time, look, we have Facebook and Instagram.
That 5 minutes of email was pretty exciting.
No judgment. I try to be accepting of all interests. But over time it became a much more interesting place, and that's where it's Stockholm, and I think that it will get there too. Maybe one more point is how many people? This may look like a little bit off tangent. How many people know how electricity works? exactly. Like, can you tell me like how this electron travel and how it's created? How, wow, wait, I'm surrounded by smart people. Okay, I don't know. I mean, I kind of know, but I really don't. I know that at some point magic happens. I turn on a switch and like a room lights up. Okay, and I don't care how it works. Like there could be little animals. Unicorns producing this, right? I don't care. What I care, I'll tell you what I care about. I care about that we are sitting in a well lit up room. I care about that so I can see you. I care about it because this way we can be videotaped. I care about my warm meal, right? I deeply care about electricity. When I get up in the morning and my hair is soaked and I can dry it so I don't look like a wet cat when I show up to work, right? I care, that is to say, I care about applications. And how it actually works in the background, it could be magic for all I care, right? And so when we get, and I think you were driving to this point, is when we get to this point is where I cannot imagine my life without electricity. And it's not because I lack imagination, right? It's because I will truly miss the applications, because my life will be completely incomplete without warm meal, the lit up room, and my dry hair, right? It will not be the same, period. And so I need my electricity. And so when we get to the point where we don't care about what's on the back end, and I think what will be on the back end is not just blockchain, because I think blockchain gets really powerful when you combine it with other stuff, which is I think where I started. You combine it with great policy, we combine it with great data, I think you had that point. You combine it with IoT, you combine it with AI, you just got a solution on steroids, which this is when we're going to be solving problems that we deemed unsolvable. This is when we cannot imagine living without it, and we don't care that it is there. That's, I think, the magic moment that I'm hoping will be happening in my lifetime.
I think, the point of larger companies releasing their own tokens is so interesting because historically, like we used to have a system where we had script that was issued by companies, where we had local banks that would issue their own dollars, right? And then at the beginning of the 20th century, we had this kind of international economic convention where we decided it would be good to be able to transact currencies internationally, and that we should have the dollar as kind of like a reserve currency. And there's this argument between like Keynes and other economists about what would be the best like way for this to happen. And so we've had, I don't know, like 100 years of that, and now I think we're going to kind of go back to the system where we have companies that are now large enough and global enough that they can issue their own tokens, they can kind of issue their own script, and that becomes more useful than a dollar as a reserve currency. Like it makes a lot of sense for a bank to issue their token because that'll just reduce their settlement times. It makes sense, like I don't know why they hadn't done that previously, why they hadn't had like digital ledgers before this since they're banks. But like for a company to do this, I think is interesting and also like a little bit frightening. In some ways because Facebook is better positioned than a bank to take over that kind of digital payment transaction, and we already are comfortable authenticating with Facebook, similar to Google.
Are we comfortable authenticating with Facebook?
But also because the companies that are in the position to do this are either American or Asian, and there's really only SAP in Europe, and they're relatively small, and they're probably not as well positioned as either the Asian or American companies. And so I think from a global policy perspective, that's really interesting too. And if I were, on a European Tech Council or something, that would really worry me that we're moving to a system where the digital, like kind of token of record, the digital reserve currency is either going to be one that's controlled by Asian companies or American companies and not by European companies. So I think that's an interesting aspect of the launch of those tokens.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I mean, I think we've touched a bit on Facebook, and I think there will be a drive in adoption coming from people like us too, who are concerned about data privacy and security and data ownership. So I think, I think it will be a little bit of both, the big players sort of coming on board to push this, but then there are sort of consumer-driven influences, I think, that will really start mobilizing these things. And I think actually the concern from consumers is what is mobilizing companies like Facebook to really start digging into this. And then another point that we touched on that I'm actually really interested in is this design aspect and like the UX of blockchain. Because something we've seen even from running kind of proof of concept and pilot engagements at a corporate, it's really hard to demonstrate exactly what's going on. So to Olga's point, we want to just know that it's working, we want to trust in it, But at this stage in the development, people do want to know how it's working because it's a new technology and they're concerned about sending their data potentially to other parties. So there's this weird dichotomy of companies want to know how it works, but we don't have a really great kind of user-friendly way to demonstrate how the technology is working today. So I'm not a designer, but I'm like really fascinated by the blockchain design space because I think doing that right will actually encourage adoption tremendously.
And they have a very high design expectations.
Yep.
So I take BART from Dublin every day and I stream videos. And if for a second it stops, you'll see me fuming, right? So that's my expectation, that even under the bridge, in the water, I get perfect reception. That's what I'm used to. So when I get this string of characters, and I thought I had to memorize that, I took it as a challenge.
That's one of the issues I face, because I just assume like, oh, you want to see it? I'm gonna show you what blockchain is. So even on our POC, yeah, you can click the button that says Blockchain Explorer, and then when you go in there, it's like, oh God, like, so what are all these transactions? And I was like, I thought you wanted to see this, but it's like, you're right, like, it definitely does need a UX UI touch, and it's just
touch?
It needs
Much more than a touch. Let's be very clear, there's a long way to go.
Just to level set though, I think that, we are in a very fortunate position these days. I mean, who watched the announcements for the 30th anniversary of the internet? Yeah. So, I mean, we've been around with the internet for 30 years, and we've now come to the point where we take it for granted.
Yeah.
And God forbid we shouldn't have a moment without that, right? We are in early days of blockchain, by and large. And I think, the era that I remember is the late 90s is really where it's at. And we're at that point where things are starting to accelerate in adoption, mostly on the provision side right now, but certainly on the public side as well, and these hybrid partnerships as well. And so we're in early days. I think if we fast forward, dare I say, a decade, I think the picture will be quite different. And I think, there is a lot of recognition in terms of what kinds of issues are we solving. There's issues of, efficiency at the lowest possible hanging fruit, right? Everybody can wrap their arms and heads around bringing greater efficiency in terms of information flow, productivity, transparency, preventing fraud. There's tons of that. And so if you look at what the current systems have, we've got a great system of exchange of information, but it's a free-for-all in terms of exchange for information. There is no validation of source or origin authentication. It's easy to collude, it's easy to manipulate, it's easy to fraud. And so when you're thinking about all of the issues we have in the current systems, is there a better way to solve it than blockchain? I argue that it is the way to solve it, but as Olga pointed out, not in isolation, because if you think about the whole story of information is about data. It's really all about data. So if you're looking at how you're acquiring and capturing that data, well, you'll probably need some sort of sensor, because God forbid a human should be involved, and that just boosts the error percentages up, right? Because there's something called human error. Then you've got manipulation of that data, whatever data is required. If you're allowed to change it, some people will find a way to change it because it benefits them.
Or if you had a bad data to begin with.
Yeah, that too.
We have a lot of clients who come to you. You were asking about limitations before. We have a lot of clients who come to us and they want to build a blockchain solution, and maybe it even makes sense in their case. And then they want to put a lot of garbage on the blockchain.
Well, you have a very secure garbage at that point.
There's maybe a value in that. But there are a few problems. And then I think you raised what are other limitations. Remember that movie Ariel, where she discovers a fork and she does she brushes her hair with it, right? That's called misuse of a tool. That's what it's called. In the last year or so, we've seen a lot of people say blank on blockchain quite a lot, right? And so blockchain is very exciting, but it's not a tool for everything. It could be misused just in the same way as Ariel misused the fork. And so I think what is going on is not just development, but us understanding the depth and breadth of the tool, and understanding that it doesn't solve everything. That we have actually a good solution for some things. We talked to a number of clients who come to us and get really excited and want to build something on blockchain, And we actually very diplomatically talk them out of it, not because we don't value their business, but because we think that other technologies like distributed database could be like an amazing, well-developed solution to their problem. If they don't need transparency, if they if not much efficiency is gained, if they don't need to get a third person out of the equation, then why go with a solution that is so new and underdeveloped and is not very friendly UI. So
I'll push back a little on that.
Sure.
This is a great
Push back.
So I'll push back
Let's
a little on
create
that.
drama.
Because I'll tell you, let's talk about a distributed database. It's great that the data is distributed, but who has ownership of that data? If you've got a centralized source of ownership, I'll bet you that that centralized system is going to have a loophole, something where somebody wants to misuse that system. And so the distributed database alone is not enough to protect the stream of data.
If that needs to be
Because people
protected,
it comes down to incentive structures. Right?
if you're trying to protect or solve that problem, absolutely. But if that's not what you're
Well,
solving,
you know,
then the answer is
I think
no.
if you look at all the use cases that we're talking about, whether it's transparency, why do we need transparency, by the way? We need transparency because there's something called fraud. There are always, no matter what system you look at, no matter which corner of the globe you look at, somebody's out to game the system, so to speak. Somebody's out there to find a loophole, to find the back door, back window, back whatever, to have entry to what we consider to be most valuable, which is data. And so, it's no surprise that people calling the data the new oil. Well, I'm not a fossil fuel fan, so I won't say data is the new oil. I'll say data is the most valuable thing that we have out there. It's quite precious. And so I think it comes down to ownership of that data. And whenever you've got a central authority figure that is owning that data and could do pretty much whatever they want with it, that's a problem. So there's issues of ownership, there's issues of consent, there's issues of privacy that goes with consent, there's issues of identity. So there's a lot of different layers to what constitutes, I think, data. And so even just a distributed platform in and of itself, I don't think will be sufficient. It may be sufficient from a low level, here's some efficiency to be gained or not gained. Those are definitely things that you can or cannot solve. But I think beyond that, you've got a system of inefficiency, because ultimately in a distributed, centrally owned system, you've got somebody that is incentivized to do something with that centrally controlled data. Are we running out of time?
Yeah, I wanted to just give the opportunity to
questions.
ask questions. Yeah.
Great point for questions. It's debate.
So yeah, questions, anyone? Raise your hands and I'll come over. Okay.
Thank you. I just got two questions in general. The first is that among all those areas we just talked about, like either supply chain or others, which one do you think we got most chance to see the mass adoption coming first? And another one is about like timing. As we all know right now, it's kind of a tricky moment. And I really like this panel to give me more conviction in this industry. To me now, just go back and working on my resume to do something else. But so like we know that probably right now the biggest problem is that we still lack the general infrastructure to see the development in area like blockchain projects. So when are we seeing, or just do we see more like mass adoption coming?
I really like healthcare. You touched on that greatly as far as like owning your data. I love Brave. I have that browser as well. I'm a real big proponent of us owning our own data and not Axiom. You don't know them, they own everything. I think they started out back in the day with those penny, you get 16 CDs for a penny, and already they were just tracking you from this whole time, what your selection was. But data ownership is a big one. I like projects that will allow you, they won't know that my name is Saritta Hines. I have 2 kids. I'm a black female and I went to this school. What they can know is that I have acid reflux issues and I take this pill and I do that and I lease it to you for as long as your study is, and I get micropayments on that. And when you're done, you completely erase it, and I can go look at the ledger and make sure that it's erased. I missed the part where you said something about putting on your resume or.
Oh, I'm asking about the timing, because that's still gonna take a while before we can see that mass adoption into the blockchain applications.
Oh, learn now. Learn now, and don't think that you have to be a developer. A lot of times people think like, oh, I don't want to get into blockchain because I have to be a developer. No, like she just said, they're UX, UI things. I can't see that. I just see black and white and how to make something look pretty, but I don't know how to make it pretty. Community managers, strategists, they're just like in any other like organization like the internet. You didn't have to be a developer. You can all these other jobs. So just find a way to tie it in.
And policy and regulation, like
Yeah,
Olga brought up, right?
Yeah, so maybe
Absolutely.
so like, I met my husband in law school sweethearts, and we have, when I never had the same job, and I always have, what he doesn't call grown-up jobs. I've been in many startups. So I finally had my midlife crisis and decided not to practice law. And so we had a talk. And so he asked me, like, why do I not want to go be a general counsel at a bigger, mightier company? That was basically kind of his question. And I said, look, there's stuff happening. It will change the world. And he's rolling his eyes. And it's kind of like everybody's storming the candy store, right? And there's amazing candy in it. And if I am just a lawyer, my job is to stand outside and give them guidance on how to enjoy it. How to strategically put it in their pockets, how to eat them in a way that optimizes their enjoyment. And I said, I just want to gorge. I just want to get in, and I want to build, and I want to be part of it. And so to your question, to which industry, there's a number of contenders. There's healthcare, there is the supply chain, there is, we mentioned financial services. Those seem to be really going on.
And power and energy, sustainable resources.
Gaming, for example, there's quite a lot of stuff going on in games. There's a lot of things going on. I don't know who's going to be first. They're all pretty exciting. I would say whichever you're attracted to, go and learn. Get in and start enjoying the candy, right? And whatever your talent is, whether it's policy, whether it's community building, whether it's whatever, everything that
Aviation.
Well, suffice
Aviation.
it to say it's a ground floor opportunity, and I think that, I'm particularly championing women getting into this space, because you don't want to be late to this party. This is going to be the biggest party ever. And so you don't want to be left out. So if you're a woman, get in on the party and be early, because your dance card's going to fill up faster than you can think about it.
Otherwise, you're going to be that person in the candy store putting your hands and mouths
say, I
on
won,
the window.
and I can't get in. There's going to be a different kind of glass
Do a couple
barrier.
more questions.
Sure. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm curious, when you all talk about blockchain, it's primarily around transactional data. I'm just curious, do you have any experience that you can talk about regarding decentralized distributed storage, like for large volumes of data? And how would that work from an end user point of view? I'm storing information to the cloud, whether it's Azure or Google. Help me understand, how does that work with peer-to-peer? How do I build trust in that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, in general, the idea is that because of the decentralized nature of storage in that case, you really are not storing all your data in one centralized cloud. So I know there might be distributed cloud, but not decentralized cloud. The idea is that the cloud is still owned by one entity, right? Whether you're working with Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, whatever, right? And so it's still centralized cloud. So the idea of decentralized cloud or decentralized storage structure is so that not all the information is basically in one place. And so the idea from a security standpoint is that if somebody tries to get a hold of that piece of data, that's just it. It's one little piece of that data, and it's not the whole data, right? And so what can they do with, I don't know, one digit of your credit card or something like this, right? That's the simplest way to explain it. That not all the numbers of that credit card, all 16 digits, are not going to be stored in one location. It's going to be one digit. Well, what can they do even if they hacked it and got hold of one digit? So the idea of decentralized storage is very much founded on that principle. I won't get into the technical aspects, but there's things like sharding and other mechanisms by which you can actually accomplish this. We are still, I would say, largely in early days, even for that, but I would say that the future of that is really something to be considered.
Allison, or do you guys also do you want to
we work with Filecoin, which is a product of Protocol Labs, and so they do this like proof of storage, storage as a service system. The way that works basically is you retain your private key, you send encrypted data that you encrypted with your private key to the system. That data is broken up into chunks, and those chunks are stored at different nodes who have offered up their storage space. So they will never be able to access your data, and they will also only have a piece of it. And then at prescribed times, they'll be challenged, and they'll be asked to say, like, tell me this certain bit in this piece of the storage that you have said you're providing, in order to make sure that they're still storing that data, that they're still providing it, and that bit will be checked against either the bit that you retain or the bit that another person who's storing another copy of your data retains. So it is multiplex in the sense that you'll have multiple people storing copies of the same data, so that you don't have to worry that one person's hard drive crashes or something, one person leaves the network and loses your data, but they're only storing small pieces of it. So it is kind of similar to sharding for other blockchains.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Back there. I know. Don't want to neglect you.
Hi, this is Monica Puchner.
Nothing like a friend who introduces.
I mean, so, there's a huge debate, the great debate of permission and permissionless. And there's a school of thought that, is in the kind of like the old school thought, which is permission is just like, we were talking about like just a central database or a shared database. Like, why would you need to run anything outside of that? Companies should just, if they're looking for a speed of transactions and otherwise, just, go with the status quo. Like, why change anything? Plus, you have also costs for implementation, costs to develop on different blockchains or build your own. You have, there's a lot of costs associated with that too. So why on earth would any company go for a permission block?
So permission is not private, by the way. Private is within one company. Permissioned is multiple companies. This is basically a trusted network of nodes. It's trusted because each node is validated, but it's not all one company. So it's not centralized. It's actually decentralized in a structure, and it's not private. It's actually permissioned. So there is a little bit of a
running on Bitcoin?
Pardon? No, it's not. It's you're talking about permission.
Of that chain?
So permission chains are different. Hyperledger is one great example of a permission
So
network.
IBM is the arbiter of.
No, they're not. It's owned by the Linux Foundation.
Not true.
Right?
And not even that. I mean, there's Hyperledger networks all over the world.
No,
it's all right. There's Hyperledger networks all over the world that are that are governed by the entities that are part of that permissioned network. So that, the technology is being used in a permissioned network for efficiencies. We talked about efficiencies before. It is not about making the world, revolutionizing the world, for non-government perspective. It is about creating efficiencies in these networks and creating opportunities for businesses within these networks to participate at the same level as other companies in that network without necessarily having to be at that, big stage. I mean, the Walmart example, and, some of us love talking about it, but some of us don't. But the Walmart example is a good example, is that they're actually building a permissioned, distributed network for all in that community to participate in at the same level. That they share the data that they need to share between those points, to make their business more efficient. And it has nothing to do with revolutionizing the way of how we govern big corporate companies. It is a technology. Like if you think
I understand the technology point. I'm just saying, like, I said what was the business case? If it's going to cost more to implement some of these business use cases.
Maybe
actually, it might cost more initially, but that's okay. When sticking with Walmart, when Walmart went digital and started opening up digital storefronts for it, it cost them a lot of money to do that. But they believed that was a requirement for them to succeed and become a current business.
So you're saying that Hyperledger is making Walmart more efficient in their business?
Absolutely.
No.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
How is it not a cul-de-sac?
a
cul-de-sac.
like a neighborhood that you live in?
Yeah, because I can go,
No,
15
no.
I can process 1,500 transactions per second in that
Yes.
cul-de-sac. So you talked about transaction time, and I think a lot of people overlook that. Like Hyperledger is pretty fast compared to some of the public blockchains out there.
Yeah.
So for me, like I will be processing a lot of transactions. What it does cost me on is not on blockchain, but my AWS bill. That is where it hits me at. And I'm just being honest, that's where I see a lot of my costs coming at is AWS, because it's like a cost to
We're all
do a
sending
read.
money to Amazon
Right.
One way or another.
Microservices, like storage, and all of this happens all the time. So that's where my cost is at. If I had my own data center, it wouldn't be, but I get it. Cost is the issue, and that's one of my challenges in trying to sell this. And it's like, okay, it's expensive now, but this price is going to come down.
Are you referring to that cost, or are you referring to the cost of actually implementing? Because I thought that's the cost you were talking about.
Well, there's a couple different costs. There's the cost of implementation, and there's the cost of ongoing costs, right? Where we amortize that over time, whatever. But you have usually like an upfront cost that you would build to build the technology requirements that's needed to build whatever.
You just get a technical
So maybe I can talk a little bit about the value of playing with a tool. And that, you want to jump in?
No, after you, he's got something to chime in.
I have a technical co-founder and I'm a founder. So
oh no, well I'm not technical, so we're good. So, I mean, look, so we didn't finish the debate where you think it's a great solution for everything. I think it's a great solution for some things, but I think the best reason to play with blockchain is to learn. We're in the beginning of this industry. Remember the misuse tool. The only way you can know how to use the tool is by actually building something. I think the best way to do it is not to take your marquee product or your marquee data or code or whatever. You take a peripheral business or peripheral product and you think about the virtues of blockchain. See this, you presumably know your industry, your business, your clients, the pain points, whether transparency or other solutions will be helpful to you, and then you pilot and you learn in the process, right? You learn quite a lot about it, right?
I'm with you. I think my question was on permission versus permissionless.
I will just say this,
because there's a lot of companies now coming out and going, and it's not about revolutionary, we can talk about IBM Hyperledger and revolutionaries and libertarians and whatever. Like moving that aside.
I will say this, I think public blockchains at the moment haven't yet achieved the efficiencies in terms of network and operations.
Yes,
so if you're thinking about things like scalability, it's still yet to come. I think there are a lot of bright minds working on those things. There's, like I said, with any system, you're going to have pros and cons. So start with the problem you're trying to solve, and then work backwards to say which system is adapted or best suited or appropriate for what you're trying to solve. So if you're looking for a way to achieve scale in the fastest way possible given today's technology, it's definitely on the permission side and not so much on the public side.
But
that will change.
Have you looked at Grid or some of the newer?
Again, I don't know that it's been tested to full scalability and to full commercial deployment. So when we get to that point of, I'm here, I'm trying to press the go button and say I want commercial scale deployment, we may get there. We may be able to look at Grid and say, wow, it actually worked when we tried to do a commercial scale deployment. Right? So I think it's good to try things out, but I think that in terms of what's been tried and tested so far, we're seeing a lot more success cases on the permission side than we are on the public blockchain side, but it is going to change. I mean, there is a convergence of sorts, and a public side and a permission side also coming together. So hence the partnerships like what we're seeing with IBM and Stellar, for example, where you did need a public side of things to effectuate that payment side, but you also needed the infrastructure that IBM and Hyperledger was able to offer, and so that was a great marriage.
At the point when you don't have to differentiate between one or the other, remember the question, when do we know it starts snowballing? That will be the point where we don't have to kind of think through that. It will be seamlessly just menu of choices. I had a conversation with somebody from Gartner recently and talked about the point that there is convergence, and a very senior analyst was laughing at me for a very, very long time, because he was challenging me, how the heck is this gonna happen ever? This person had 20 years on me, and was really acing his seniority, and telling me that he's seen everything before I even showed up on this planet Earth, and he told me that this is gonna be basically taking 10, 20 years if I'm lucky. But Jordan disagrees.
Yeah.
One more question.
I have a follow-on question to this question. Saritta, you touched upon the potential.
Hold the.
Oh, sorry. Saritta, you touched upon the potential threat that quantum computing poses to the blockchains, especially in terms of, as I understand it, in terms of public blockchains, the ability to corrupt some of the blocks. And I'm not a cryptographer, but I understand that there is more of a vulnerability with public blockchains compared to permissioned, or correct me if I'm wrong, private blockchains. So I'm wondering, given that all of you work with large enterprises, how much in general are they focusing on the coming issue of blockchain security? I mean, right now, everything is, kind of testing out small payments, micropayments, but when we get to commercial payments, in large volumes, it seems this issue is going to become foregrounded. I'm just wondering if any large companies are anticipating how to deal with this.
I help them talk about it. I think when we talk about security, what we don't talk about it from a futuristic standpoint. I try to bring up, like, listen, depending on how long your chain is, it's vulnerable. If you can reach it from the outside, it's vulnerable. And I believe it's IBM just released almost like a public version of quantum computing. So it's once that really kicks in, and I wrote about it in my white paper, this is a problem we probably need to look at. But it almost seems so futuristic that is people really don't think about it. Some things I talk about, when we're installing this whole document that I go through to say, well, okay, how many parties do you have? Is everyone trusted? Where is the certificate authority? Where is that going to be housed at? Are your keys in-house or are they out-house? And then I always bring in, quantum computing can come and take all of this away. But it seems like it's so far that it's we're not really worried about that yet. And it's just we'll just talk about storing stuff on chain, off chain, what type of information you need to store, who's keeping your keys. That's a real big one.
We deal with security. So maybe we attract people who actually worry about it, but we only talk to people who worry, and it seems like a lot of enterprises worry about security. The reality is security is not a new problem. We've seen it before internet, we've seen it during internet, we're gonna see it after internet if that ever happens. And we've seen DAO, right? Money do disappear. We've seen other, right? So and then anybody has been affected by DAO?
Yeah.
If you ever talk to somebody who watched their money disappear right in front of their eyes, it doesn't matter how much there was, but that they'll describe the feeling of helplessness. Like watching your money taken out of your pocket and you just sit there. And everyone I talk to who ever experiences it, it's like a very visceral reaction. So I think security is a big challenge. Well, our theory is that it actually doesn't help development, doesn't help adoption, is because there's a lot of concerns. When we talk about security and blockchain, we talk at different layers. It's a lot more secure at the platform level. As you do at an application level, it gets worse, right? So smart contracts, we audit quite a lot of smart contracts. They're not smart as in, she's very smart, and they're not contracts. They're pieces of code created by humans. Humans make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes. Some of those mistakes are intentional, some of those are not. But smart contracts, they're vessels for a lot of values, and so by definition, they're lucrative targets, and they attract criminals.
So some of the security of cryptographic hash functions comes from the idea that it's very difficult to factor very large prime numbers, and so the threat of quantum computers is that it would make that easier. There are, though, other sort of one-way, not necessarily algebraic, like one-way computations that can be built into hash functions that would not be significantly easier for quantum computers. So cryptographers are working on building kind of quantum-resistant hash functions that would use a different, a different algebraic method that is not factoring large prime numbers. That would be something else. So they're working on building these functions that could then replace the the functions that would be vulnerable to quantum computers, increasing the speed of factorization.
And doing it at scale.
Some are actually working on not just quantum resistant, but quantum proof blockchains, or like the quantum version of a blockchain in a way. So there's a lot of activity on that front, and so while it might seem kind of a little bit further out in the distance, and depending on who you talk to, you can get a different number on how far out that seems to be. But I think that anytime there is a threat, the awareness of that threat is what's there, and I think if you're in this space, you've really got to be working on what's the next generation anyhow, because otherwise there's an existential threat.
Just one very quick thing that I want to clarify and open to more discussion on is that actually private blockchains are less secure than public blockchains, just based on the number of nodes in the network. And we did talk a little bit about updates and forks and things like that, so you are sort of subject to those types of changes in the network, but from a security standpoint, public blockchains are actually more secure.
And so I know there's a lot of debate on this topic, and I love this. So just encourage even more debate. I'll say, how many of you actually use the internet, and how many of you use the internet more? So on the public versus permission blockchain topic, I know there's a lot we're going to do in this area in the coming years, but I leave on that note on that topic. But we want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to this panel. Thank you, the panelists, for spurring on this amazing discussion. I want to hand it over to Marina right now to close out the evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to fantastic panelists. We had absolutely wonderful discussion, and I thank you all for your amazing insights and audience for participating so proactively. Additional thank you to Kyle and K&L Gates for sponsoring and hosting us tonight. Thank you, guys. We at Blockchain at Women have this wonderful tradition of a lightning talk when we invite our audience to come on stage and speak about their projects for a few minutes. So, and with that, I would like to invite Marina on stage.
Thank you. Well, even though my company, we're not on blockchain, but my name is Marina. Good evening, all. Amazing panel. Really enjoyed it. So we at BeFast Media will live stream your talk, your panel discussion tonight. So if somebody missed this amazing panel, you can go to our YouTube channel and rewatch it again. So we at BeFast help companies to reach out to maximize their audience if they have offline events or happenings. It can be on their website, on their social media. We use these, professional cameras to live stream the events. And since we have this topic, I just created use cases for live streaming for you. So for example, you can live stream your product or service launches, your interviews, your Q&A with thought leaders, live events, training, workshops, auctions, sales announcements, so you name it. And it turns out that live streaming is a good digital marketing tool. It's much efficient and faster than SEO or bloggers. So if you have any questions, reach out. I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So with that, I would like to.
Karen, am I going? Yeah. You want to come up here?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you. One more.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ruby Ye. And for those half of you that said you were new to blockchain, you are going to love what I'm going to share. And Radhika, I also appreciate how you set it up for me, because I'm a producer of a global online training program for forward-thinking women called No Woman Left Behind. All right? And what it is, it's an online training program with over 20 of the top female founders of global consumer blockchain apps. So we really get it down to the level that, regular people will be understanding, because the whole purpose I'm doing this is that when I learned what blockchain is, I thought, oh my God, this is going to change the world. Yes, most people, most women, and a lot of men don't know about it. All right, so this is the reason why it's this training program. So we have people like Galia Benartzi, who's a superstar in this arena. Then we have people like Dr. Gemma Green, who's talking about solar sharing among neighbors. We had people like also KJ Erickson, who's talking about something that could potentially replace eBay. All right, so these are all consumer applications, blockchain applications that exist now or will be available in 6 months. All right, the other reason I'm doing this is exactly what Radhika said. Get in on it now. All right, get in on a ground level. You know, you don't have to be techie because there are going to be jobs in marketing. So each of the founders talk about it. You know, they talk about the kind of job opportunities that they have, and they talk about the opportunities that are available for women, all right? And it's available for free. So my ask is that I'm looking for women's groups who would benefit from this, and we're also looking for girls groups that we want to give scholarships to for this, all right? So thank you very much. So again, don't get left behind. So those don't know anything about this is the perfect thing for you, and I'll be happy to offer you one of these cards, all right? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I would like to announce our next event, which will happen on May 1st. And we will speak about investment in the space and everything that is happening, that happened in 2018 and 2017 prior to that, and what should we expect in 2019 and 2020. So we would like to invite a lot of investors and speak about how the project will fundraise, what kind of challenges are there. Adoption is one of them. And please participate, reach out to us, and we looking forward to seeing you all again on March 1st. Thank you.
Please come up to us afterwards if you have any ideas about topics you want to learn more about, hear more about, or have speakers you want to recommend.
You were asking about the career opportunities? You should definitely take one of them.